I tell you what, we're right at about 5 after. Why don't we go ahead and get started? Welcome everyone. We have a little bit of a lower attendance today, but we will. This will be posted online soon, and we look forward to folks being able to join us as they can in that medium as well. I'm Adam Radnauer. I manage chaplaincy and clinical ministries for Davie Medical Center, and part of this great steering committee that we have. And glad to have Teresa Jackson with us as well, who is part of our initial group of our initial steering committee, I should say. So we're glad that you're with us today as well. We want to do introductions of our other members in just a second. I will say, just for a programmatic note, that the 2021 schedule is now up on Best Health website, and we hope to have at least a PDF form that we can email out soon as well. But next month, I think, is our difficult behaviors. If anybody on the steering committee remembers, I think that's correct. We're doing difficult behaviors with Michelle Blakely, hopefully next month. But you'll notice on the website that will be updated, the most up to date as it can be as well. How about we go around the room and introduce ourselves to the group as well?
I'll start. I'm Allison Brown, and I'm retired from hospice for, let's see, 48 days, I think now. I'm in day 48 of retirement, and still struggling to hit that stride. But my journey with caregiving began around 2000 when my father was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and he ultimately died of Alzheimer's complications. But I have a heart for caregivers, and I hope to be able to continue in this role on the steering team of Caregiver Academy.
I am Angela Nicholson. I am the community nurse educator for Trellis Supportive Care. And I am also a caregiver and have been one for a number of years now. But I enjoy doing what I do, and I enjoy being a part of this steering committee. And right now I am in our intake department. So I'm going to say you bye-bye.
Thank you, Angela.
Go ahead, Shannon.
Good morning or good afternoon. I'm Shannon Holland. I am with Home Instead Senior Care.
And as Adam said, I'm Teresa Jackson. I'm with Piedmont Triad Regional Council Area Agency on Aging, and I am the Family Caregiver Support Program Specialist. And I was glad to be included in the origin of this Caregiver Academy, and I can't believe it's been several years already. So you have a good thing going, and I like to check in once in a while. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. We do. It's hard to believe that we're in our, I guess, 4th year now, or 3rd or 4th year. So it's really continues to go well. Well, I am up today on a new topic that we haven't covered specifically in this course yet, on necessary losses and what that entails for both our aging population, but also what does that mean for us as caregivers as well. So I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully. All right, so the test, do y'all see a full PowerPoint screen? Okay, that's the one that we were shooting for, so that's perfect. Well, so I will, of course, I did this, what I wasn't supposed to do, so I'm gonna stop sharing for a second. This presentation is built off of this book here. I don't know if you've heard of it before or not, but it's called Necessary Losses: The Loves, Illusions, Dependencies, and impossible expectations that all of us have to give up in order to grow by Judith Vorse. And I think this book was, I want to say 1985. So it's getting some age on it now, but 1986. But really is a pivotal work on from someone who knows children's literature and can write in a way that's both witty and serious and philosophical all at the same time. What I really appreciate about the book is it is both true to the psychological developments of how we grow and how we mature, as well as more the philosophical existential sides of what does life mean to me at the various points in my life. So as you go throughout this book, I encourage all of you to take a look at it at some point. There's changes in there about relationships and changes that we go through in terms of identity at various stages of development. But all of it is housed within this notion of losses, which sounds like that could be a very depressing topic, but it really isn't in a number of ways. Today's presentation really is built off of this book, and particularly a chapter on getting old. And that's the name of the chapter, is I'm Getting Old, I'm Getting Old. This presentation is really built for those who are caregiving for folks 65 and older. And we're going to talk about some of the various stages that we hit as we are caregiving for those who are in that age bracket or brackets as we go throughout this presentation today. There'll be some other books that I'll share as we go throughout, but I wanted you to know this one right off the bat. So what losses accompany aging? Just popcorn some of them out. What might be some of the losses that we experience with aging?
Mobility is one.
Mm-hmm.
Hearing.
Hearing, yes.
Sense of purpose.
Sense of purpose, yes.
Independence.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. What else? How many people are showing up at those high school reunions as we get older?
We lose our friends.
We lose our friends, we lose our community in a number of ways, and we lose those who have journeyed with us throughout life in so many ways. This is just a short list of the many losses that we experience as we age. And when I say aging in this capacity, I mean as a 30-year-old and I mean as a 60-year-old. Life changes and our growth implies a sense of loss with it. So when I talk about the necessary losses today, I do mean grieving in some way. I do mean us actually going through the formal grief stages. At the same time, there are many losses that we have throughout our lives. I was just talking about our 3-year-old son a few moments ago. We have a friend whose name is Chris, and for some odd reason, Sully calls him Clee. He can't get out the S and can't get out that CHR part. And just the other night, we were FaceTiming them, and he came out with Christopher. Like, he threw Christopher out there like he had been saying it for years. And just that little bit of development, that little piece of growth was also a loss. Clee no longer is with us, except for just a memory that we've had. There are many times that we have experienced that type of loss as we grow. And really, as Judith Vorse says, we can only have positive changes because of the many losses that we do experience. Loss actually provides a means of us moving forward. I will say today is in the Christian tradition, Ash Wednesday, which is typically the the beginning of Lent and a time where we wrestle with our own mortality, which just seems quite fitting for a conversation on losses today. But I heard a great reframe this morning from one of my classmates who had said, you know what, we're doing enough dying this year. Let's not celebrate dying. Let's not use the cross and ashes in that way. Instead, this year, let's talk about that burial is more than that. Burial is actually being planted. It's not just being buried in the ground. And that slight little reframe was a really nice way of thinking about some of the losses that we experienced too, both the losses of life, but also the many individual losses that we experience as well. But what are we retaining in aging too? What are some of the things that we retain? So we see a list of things that we lose, but what are the things that we are keeping as well? And again, just popcorn some of those out.
A lifetime of memories and
Yes.
successes.
Yeah. Stories.
All our stories building on what Teresa said, and hopefully some wisdom.
Yeah.
Lessons learned.
Yeah. So it seems in some ways that we could in some ways call these spiritual developments. When we talk about lessons learned, when we talk about memories, narrative, stories, there's a spiritual element, not necessarily that can be religious, but it doesn't have to be. There's a spiritual element that's a part of this. It's interesting when we think about our development of how we actually develop as one organism with many parts. So I'll start out by saying it this way. I think we can all agree that our bodies, our joints are definitely finite creatures, that they don't last forever. And we begin to hear from them more and more as the years go on. I think we can also say the same thing about our psychological development, the adaptations that we were able to make back in the day to be able to combat stress or to think strategically or think critically about problems may not come to us quite as quickly as it did back in the day. But spiritually, we really don't show any type of degeneration. Spiritually, it seems to be more of a straight line development, whereas psychologically and biologically, we seem to plateau at some point. So there is a sense that when we're in our 30s, that our spiritual lives, our emotional lives, our physical lives are all developing together. There's also a sense that after we hit the age of 40 and begin a journey towards 60, that our development starts to take an interesting turn, that our spiritual development, our emotional and our physical development start to separate in some ways. And we have to do some work to come back, to bring those back together. So here what we're saying here, if I could do this on a small screen and you still be able to see me, our development when we are in that 65 plus range really is less connected than it was at other parts of our development. So our spiritual, those stories, memories, life lessons, virtues may still be developing in an upward capacity, whereas our joints, our physical beings, and our emotional beings may not have the same capacities that they used to. So there is some sense of loss in the centrality of who we are as individuals, just in that loss mechanism of losing sense of our connectedness. So hear me say that. Well, let's talk about that 65 plus age for a second. So when we typically think of 65 plus, we think of Erik Erikson's integrity despair stage. which is built around this. So Erickson's work in the psychological community is all about you either make it or you don't. So the integrity in this stage is about wisdom and being able to show that life added up to some bigger purpose, or it didn't. The despair part is the hopelessness, despair that my life was lived without meaning or without any sense of purpose that I can identify. There's also the psychological piece that when we think of our family system, that there's ordered change. And when we get to that 65 plus stage of life, more change is being ordered of us than we are ordering of the system. So I often talk to our folks here in the seeing geriatricians that that their schedule of things to do is often more around which doctor appointment they need to go to this week rather than what event is coming up next week. That's one of those pieces where the system begins to tell us what we're going to do versus us choose how that system unfolds. So that's sort of the psychological piece. Again, developmental stage and life trajectory, going back up to the top of this slide, it's interesting that if the stage theorist in psychology would say that some of the greatest growth spots that we have is right at the cusp of a change. So transitioning from this stage to the next stage, which is also the point of loss. So this is sort of going right off of Worce's work of loss produces change. Thus, we are being planted into something else that grows. Let's go to this slide next. So let's talk about those faith stages for a moment. So I said, if we think about our growth in terms of physical and psychological, it sort of has an apex and then begins to come back downhill. Well, faith development tends to be more of a steady incline up. We'll use that phrase. James Fowler in 1981, so around the same time period of this writing, actually took some of Piaget and Erickson's work in developmental psychology and applied it to our faith perspectives and said there really are these 4 stages that we get to later in life. Really, the last one, that universalizing, we rarely get to, but the individuative, reflective, and the conjunctive faith is really this space where we realize that what matters most in life is not just about what matters to me, but it's what matters to us as a people or us as a created being. So there's this part of, as our psychological development grows and we're worried about, are we leaving a legacy and leaving something important in this life? Have we made a difference? Our faith development is coming right alongside that and saying, yes, and have we made a difference for others, not just for ourselves as we're showing up in this space too. But there's also a second theory that goes right alongside this faith spirituality side that's called existentialism. You may have heard of May and Yalom and some of those theorists who would say that there are 4 ultimate concerns in our lives, and that is death, freedom, isolation, and meaninglessness. So if you think about those as well, I can say that as I get older, those 3 or those 4 items are things that I worry about more than I did when I was in my teenage years. As we continue to grow in age, these concerns continue to come back to the forefront of who we are. So yes, there is this part of us that is seeking more altruistic type experiences of the world, making sense and making meaning, that we are doing something purposeful in the world. But there's also still this this pull that, am I really confident in my understanding of death, freedom, isolation, and finding meaning in my existence? That's the theory side. That's the theoretical stuff that that will undergird our conversation today. Are there any questions about just laying this out, how it shows up? And then we'll look at why it's important in a minute. Anything? I can see a couple tiles. So if you, please, if there are questions that you have, interrupt me, because I can't see you as well as I wish I could. We'll put it that way. So Robert Peck was a developmental psychologist too. And Voice talks about him as being fixated on how our attitude affects how we age. So there's a whole movement too that's called the power of positive psychology. We know about that side. This is a little bit different. This is more about just noticing where our perspectives and attitudes align with how we're experiencing life. So Peck talks about body preoccupation and body transcendence. So according to Peck, as we age, we either focus on how our bodies, our minds, our brains, our biological selves are deteriorating, or we're focused on how our bodies are vehicles of accomplishing something good in the world. You probably know persons on both sides of the mix here. I know I certainly do, who, just to tell a few quick stories, I have a mother that I play tennis with who is not 65, but right at the 60 cusp, that can beat me most days in tennis and have no problem doing it. Hers is, yes, she has knee pain. Yes, she has shoulder pain. And yes, she is probably going to ice up really well when she gets home from playing, a lot more than I am when I get home. But at the same time, her focus is on, she's going to have fun and she's going to enjoy it until the moment that she can't. But then I also meet 50-some-year-olds who are in the hospital needing knee replacements or needing other type of orthopedic surgeries, who are quite convinced that their days of playing sports and their days of enjoying things more on the active side of life are long gone. And that's just a difference in perspective. It's a difference in attitude. And if we go back into the philosophical parts, it's a difference in how we see the world, either as a myth or as a parable. I think I've used this with y'all last year or the year before when talking about more of how trauma and depression affect us. But to say just a minute and camp out here with myth and parable for a minute, myth, we basically, all of our stories in our lives have two components to them. There is a myth that we tell and there's a parable that we tell. The myth, let's say, for instance, a wedding. The myth is that it was a beautiful April sunny day, that it was in the 70s, the birds were chirping in the sky. There was a beautiful bride, a handsome groom that showed up loving one another and vowing the rest of their lives together. So that's one story, but then there's also a second story that accompanies every story that we have. And the second story is this. The bride really didn't know if she wanted to go down the aisle or not. She was worried about the 50% success rates of marriages, and they weren't quite sure if the birds were going to eat the cake that was sitting outside at the wedding too. So you see how there's really two sides to every story, and it's the myth and the parable side. And all of us land on either a little more of the myth or we land on a little more of the parable. So it's the glass half full, the glass half empty kind of thing. That affects us tremendously when we are talking about aging. The more that we are in, the more that this shapes how we understand our significance in life, of whether or not our best days are behind us or we're living into our best days, impacts our social well-being in a number of ways that we'll talk about as we go throughout today. There are really three ways that people age, that they fall into three main categories. There's the healthy pessimist that focuses on one's inability. So this is the person I was saying that really feels like their greater days have gone. They would rather not think about what could be good in the future. They would rather just live in the past. Then there's the healthy optimist that feels capable of doing everything, and they're ready to get a knee replacement so they can go out and rock climb again. You know, that's just their personality and their attitude toward life. Surprisingly, I know a lot more of the optimists than I know pessimists these days. And I think I think part of that is a rise in how we understand depression and anxiety. Mental health, I think that's one of the greatest gifts that mental health has offered us, is some awareness, bodily and psychological awareness of how we are living into the communities that we live into. That doesn't necessarily mean someone going and speaking with a psychologist or a therapist, but more just a general understanding of how our mental health impacts our physical health, I think is something that is adding to our optimism. Maybe I'm just being optimistic about that, but we'll see what happens. The last one is the healthy realist. This is the person, as Vorse says, clearly perceives deficits and but also what to do in spite of them. So this might be the person who gets a knee replacement and realizes, you know, I'm probably not going to go bungee jump for a while, but I can at least walk around my neighborhood and enjoy being outside. This is a more of a healthy understanding of one's limitations. Put it that way. Any questions about this attitude and aging pieces that we're getting into now? And again, hear me say, I'm not, and don't want to, whatever your beliefs are or your beliefs, I will say as a therapist myself, I'm not heavy into the power of positive thinking movement. That just doesn't work well for me in terms of the fullest extent, that if I'm diagnosed with an incurable disease that I can will it away. I don't think that is how things work. I am into this attitude stuff though, that the more that we choose how we're going to interpret the day around us, the healthier we can be. I think there's something quite impactful to that. And our trauma scientists are showing that that's quite the case with a number of our illnesses, even down to our immune system, how healthy our immune system tackles the world around us. So
I wanted to just share real quickly about that, Adam. Y'all know I'm I'm 61, and I had a real lesson in the fact that I don't see myself as deficit at all. We took our kids and grandkids snow skiing last month, and it never once occurred to me that I would not be skiing. You know, I rented my skis, I had my boots, I got my lift tickets, and we got there, and it is a lot like riding a bicycle. If you haven't done it in 20 years, a lot comes back, but that your reflexes aren't as quick, your balance isn't as quick. But it was just real interesting to me how my grandsons reacted to me, Gigi, being out on the slope. You know, they expected their mommies and their daddies to be out there, but there was a real novelty to me being out there. And I did foolishly attempt a black diamond that would not have been a problem for me a few years back, but I didn't go back up it. I did it once, and that was fine, and I didn't fall, and it was all good. But as I reflected on it later, just the joy of being there, you know, it was no longer about my skill as a skier. It was about developing their skills and helping them feel more confident and riding up the lift to make sure they didn't get hurt going off, and me going slow so that they could go fast and feel safe. It was just a real trade-off of the way I approached skiing, you know, back in my heyday. So I'm really relating to this.
Can I push a little bit?
Yeah.
Did you have fun?
Oh gosh, did I have fun? I had the most fun. And y'all, it was kind of embarrassing. Um, there are workers at all the lifts where you get on, and I would just say, but I'm here with my grandson. I was that obnoxious grandma that is so proud of her grandkids. And, my joy was just, it was to the moon and back. I really, really, really enjoyed that. I really hope that I'm well enough and physical enough to be able to do it again, because it was their first time and they loved it. So
Had a good time. That's wonderful. Great story. Thanks for throwing that out there. And what a great example of the realism too, that you pushed it, you went on that black diamond, but you decided one time was plenty. So that good for you. That's exciting. That's exciting. What I've already given you the cheap answer now, but I was going to ask, what is one of the most significant things that happened to us in that 65 plus range? And one of the most significant ones that we know of is retirement. Retirement has in and of itself just a host of system changes that causes us a lot of loss and a lot of gain. I mean, in some ways we are gaining a lot of free time. In other ways, we are asking ourselves quite often, who am I in retirement? Who is this person that I haven't been dealing with in the same way for 40 hours a week, that I have to figure out what to do with this extra 40 hours with? And in that, how does the world see me now? Because retirement often brings about unresolved grief and repressed emotions that we've sort of hidden behind the power or authority of our careers, our roles, that now we have to deal with the person that's in front of us, not the person who has all the accolades that come along with many years of work. So there's this other piece of retirement beyond just the enjoyment of life, that it really is a culture shock of how do we cope with this new person that's in front of us. It also brings about some quite difficult to think about stages as well. I grew up in a family that you respected elders, and you always looked to them as the wise person in the room. But unfortunately, in our Western culture, that's not the norm in a lot of places, at least not in the way that it is in other Eastern cultures, or the way that it was even 40 years ago in many of our cultures, or many of our experiences, I should say that. There is sort of a pervasiveness of, especially with the speed of technology today, that older adults just can't get that technology, have to keep asking us questions of how to use it, that they shouldn't be driving, that they shouldn't have a part-time job when they retire. There's these pervasive ideas that really, I don't know that we've addressed or even named as a society in a lot of ways, of how we treat those who are older than us in our society. So I think there's another piece of that too, that perhaps was repressed by the titles and the authority that we had in our working world, that now we have to deal with as individuals. That's quite different. The other one is, and I will say this is a big one for many of us, given our personality types, changes of routine. That I don't have to wake up and be at work at 8 o'clock in the morning, and now I have to figure out what to do with my day. But hear me say, this is a weird one, because you go most of your life waiting for that day when you can wake up and do whatever it is that you want to do. But remember that Erickson's stage that we're talking about here, where making something purposeful out of life is part of this part of who we are. It's not just a choice to wake up each day and do whatever you want to do. There's a natural pull to make something meaningful happen. So there is some natural, it may feel like freedom, but there's natural pulls within our psyche that's saying you might not be as free as you think you are. So throw that out there too. I talked about that there are multiples. There's the pessimist, there's the realist, there's the optimist. Well, I'll give you the couple more too. There are multiple ways of living our elderly lives to its fullest. And there's really no right way or wrong way to do it. The person who's the pessimist may be just as happy being the pessimist as those of us who are the realist or the idealist or the optimist. We'll put it that way. That there's not a right way or a wrong way to do this. There are three ways that people typically do engage paths of wellness. The reorganizers are those who retire and then find some way to reframe active lifestyles into being busy. So I'm going to start volunteering twice a week with my church. I'm going to be involved with the YMCA. I may do some volunteering at other organizations. I want to see my grandkids 2 or 3 times a week. And you feel that gap that was there with work with something else. The other one, though, is focused. So I used to have to carry 10 different hats when I worked. So now I want to focus on 2 or 3 things that I really enjoy, and I want to do them well. I find that so I've given it away that I love to play tennis. Surprisingly, there's a lot of folks who start playing tennis when they retire. It's something they've maybe picked up 2 or 3 times throughout their lives, but it's something that they decide, I'm going to focus in on this and have fun doing it. Golf is another one. People love to play golf and love to figure it out once they have time to do so. Then you have the disengaged. Now, disengaged, I think it sounds a little judgy, but we'll go with the 1980s psychology here. This is the person who becomes the contemplative in retirement. So this person might have been the one who had a very public role in his or her professional life, and now really wants to be secluded in the mountains and get up and pray and meditate and fish and not talk to anybody. Like, that's this person right here. And you know what? Whichever path you choose, there's probably 5 other ones now, 40 years later. Whatever path you choose is okay, as long as it's okay with you, and as long as there's some sense that I am drawing meaning or somehow weaving the tapestry of my life together at this stage. As long as I'm fulfilling the stage development of my psyche, my spirit, and being attentive to whatever health concerns are going on in my body, then typically I'm doing this well. I'm at least succeeding in this part of the aging process. The last section of this chapter talks about psychotherapy, and I don't want to get on a soapbox, but I'm going to get on a soapbox. So a lot of people say I am too old to dig into my past and dig in dirt that I don't need to dig into. So a lot of people after the age of 50 never decide to go to therapy. For those who do decide to go to therapy in their 60s, 70s, 80s, there is a renewed sense of self-worth. There's a possibility of being able to forgive those at various points in one's life and be able to forgive ourselves in other ways. Find new ways to adapt to the changes and losses that we are experiencing. Connect maybe for the first time with our emotional selves. Discover some sense of meaning and some way of exploring the narrative, the story, as we were talking about earlier, And then find ways to ritualize change in our new life, whatever that means for us at whatever stage we're at. Some would say that we are at the optimal stage to be able, we're at the optimal developmental stage to be able to use therapy most appropriately when we're in this stage of our lives. I would agree with that in a number of ways. I work with some older individuals who have held on to things for 50 years, who find some sense of redemption and purpose because of some development that's come from psychotherapy when they're in their 60s and 70s. That's quite an impressive image to see someone really take back their lives when they feel like their life has been lost to whatever psychological issue is a strong word, but issue has come up in the past. For trauma, I've said this before, trauma is more the space that I work in. You know, we can repress things for a really long time, and then some loss typically brings it right back up to us. And what better place to work through some of that than seeing someone that you can talk to? So we'll name that. I want to go back. I realize I think I jumped a slide a little bit ago, and I want to go back and find it because this is something that was new to me. Subdivisions of age. I had not heard of this idea prior to doing this work in terms of actually laying it out this way, but there's young old age, which is 65 to 75, middle old age, 75 to 85, and then there's, pardon the phrase, but old age, 85 plus. And you know, what really struck me at this was we typically think of 65 plus being a particular age group, but we would never think of a 30-year span at any other point in our lives being the same person that we do at our older age. For instance, putting someone who is 87 in the room with someone who is 66 is equally as different as someone who is 21 being in the room with someone who is 42. So being able to distinguish what needs we need at various points in our lives is equally important. So I wanted to name that was a quite important piece as well. So before I go any further, any questions, comments that you all have? Okay, I'm gonna go about 5 more minutes, and then we'll turn over to any questions or comments that you have, or if there's something that you're questioning, how the significance falls into your own caregiving role, be happy to answer those as well. What does this ultimately mean? This means that the folks that we are caregiving for who fall into one of those 3 categories of older adults is probably doing a lot of cerebral work and a lot of soul work to do life reflections. So many of them are very interested in their history. They're very interested in the decisions that they've made in life, and asking others whether or not they believe their lives added up to something important. So it may be that the person that you're caring for wants to sit around and reminisce, and wants to reminisce on something that happened before you were born. But that's probably a mechanism of trying to do some life review and tying up the tapestry of one's life. We often think of this life review as being that last thing that happens to us, and that can certainly be the case, especially in traumatic situations. But it's also something that can happen to us when any significant change happens to us, whether that be a loss or a growth of something. Folks who retire typically talk about having some set time of their lives where they're doing some reflection, whether that be through a memory book or writing a novel or something to help them tell their story and figure out how they fit into the history of existence. So what does that mean? It means that the next time you are busy as a caregiver, running around doing 10 things that you have probably no idea how to do, or feel competent to do, or feel like you've got the time to even breathe for yourself, and your care recipient says, I want to tell you about when I was your age, that it might be worth taking a moment to sit there with them, because that might be just as important as changing the bedpan or making sure the thermostat is set at the right temperature. Because this person is trying to make some sense of this new reality. It also might mean that inviting the care recipient to take up some new form of art, whether that be poetry writing or using adult coloring books or taking up a painting class, something of that nature could be a really therapeutic model for exploring this stage of his or her life. The other one is there may be ways to help encourage individuals in this stage to do this more succinctly. And that might be writing a book or helping someone write a book. And I'm not talking about a novel here or Pax Christi. I mean, I am talking about something that is just a way to recall stories that may be lost. Might be something important to do. The last one that I'll bring up is if you have grandkids and this happens to be a grandmother or a grandfather, letting them help them with schoolwork can be one of the greatest things that an older person can do. And part of it is they feel like they are contributing to their loved one's success first, but second, this is a way of recalling stories from their past too. So you're actually you're feeding two birds at one time here by doing this engagement. So there are many ways to help folks wrestle with meaning, wrestle with narrative, and ritualize change. But don't forget that psychotherapists and pastors and other folks who are trained in this work to do it would love to come alongside you in helping your care recipient do this as well. Any questions that you all have, any comments, anything that maybe we can use the next little bit for a Q&A. We've got a lot of wisdom on this call as well. I'm going to go back to our regular screen.
I'll throw out there, Adam, two things. One was I appreciate the fact that I now have approval of some sort to disengage and go live in the mountains and pray and meditate, and that is perfectly acceptable behavior. But as I'm listening to you talk and the digital divide between younger and older, it creeps in so many different places. Like when you were just speaking about grandparents working with grandchildren to help them with their school and their studies, and now everything is so electronic that it puts an additional wedge in there. And I don't know how to fix all of that, but I'll throw it out there for conversation.
Yeah, I wonder, so this may be the optimistic come out again, but I wonder if there won't be a turning back between how the technological divide has created distance to begin. I wonder, let me just not talk in jargon. I wonder how much of us having to do FaceTime and everything else with our grandparents over the last year has increased our ability to use mediums to connect with one another rather than drive us apart. I don't know that we'll know the answer to that for 5 years, but I do wonder, just on some trends, what might come of that. Great point.
I think it has probably made people more comfortable with different means to communicate. And, you know, you have 85-year-olds now using Facebook with their family, and other folks getting on virtual support groups. They're getting to be less apprehensive, let's say, because that's now the norm. And there are people to guide them through the process. We're more willing to take the time to explain the steps than in the past, like, well, just do it. If you can't do it, well, forget it. But now we rely on it so much that people are taking the time to explain it and use it and try it out and test it. So I think it's going to become more common. Now, if they make it more difficult, technically in the future, that could be another challenge. But
Sure.
Meanwhile, I think more and more people want to be able to connect too, and they want to know how to do it so they can see their grandkids, because they've been left to that as the key connector now when you can't be in person. My thoughts.
Some of y'all know that on the ski trip that I mentioned, our middle grandson injured his neck. So we've kept him quite a bit in the last couple of weeks. He's in a little neck brace and he's doing fine. So this week we've been doing homework. And Shannon, it's true. He has his own tablet that he brought home, and I was watching over his shoulder. Once I got Wi-Fi set up on it, he went straight to his little place. He has his own user ID. He typed in his little password. He's in first grade, and boom, away he went into some educational games. But before that, there was still the spelling words that had to be reviewed, the math problems that had to be gone through, that you know, at this point, those are not online yet. Those skills are being enhanced by the games he's playing that are using math, and to win, you know, you got to add 2 and 3 together correctly before you can go to the next level. But I thoroughly enjoyed, you know, going through the spelling words and helping him with his little math problems, greater than and less than, and I made up more work for him because he was really having fun, and there were some, you know, the pattern that the worksheets used, it was very easy to just keep going with it. And so again, I think that it's probably going to be an application of our 3 different mindsets. You know, there are going to be people that are going to look at that technology and clam up, and they're already doing that. You know, they are more isolated now. Y'all have heard me tell too many times about, now my mom is on Zoom all the time, and the first time she even knew what it was March of last year, with our family Zoom. And now, you know, she's going to Bible studies and book clubs and doing all kinds of stuff on Zoom. And we even had a lady on Caregiver Academy a few months ago that this class was her first time using this, you know, face conference technology, and she wanted to participate so badly, she figured it out. So I think we'll be adaptive. I think that we will, you know, we will try to invest ourselves in whatever we've got to do to be relevant, the same way that we probably have most of our lives, until we go into therapy and really get our act together.
Sure. Well, and Allison, to piggyback on that, I wonder how many like Shannon that has not had permission or not has sought but never been given permission to just go isolate, go by themselves, are now using this as an excuse to do so. And I wonder what that conversation might look like post-COVID, when someone actually gets to do what they wanted to do the whole time. So I'm also the person who on the weekend goes out on the farm and doesn't talk to anybody. So that's I'm part of that person too. So I'll name it. I kind of like isolation.
I am too. You know, for all that we come across as people, and they say the difference in an extrovert and an introvert is where you go to recharge.
Yes.
If you want to be alone, if you go inward to recharge, you're technically an introvert. And I don't think anyone would say that any of us were introverts. We come across as extroverts, but
Very true. Very true.
Oh, I am like, just my eyes are like popping open. I have always thought of myself as the most introverted extrovert there
Right.
was, and I sure wouldn't have pegged y'all. Teresa, are you one of these too?
you're muted, baby.
I think she said yes. Actually, I am.
Yeah, I like to be alone at times too. Yes, I'm a people person, and I miss that, but I can be fine and happy with my quiet time and just, time to veg, do my own thing.
Yeah, I've taken up
Puzzles.
jigsaw puzzles.
Nice.
I can't wait to do my jigsaw puzzle. I
I don't
haven't
think
been,
I'm smart enough, or my brain is wired like that, but I applaud you for doing it.
yeah, and I'm gonna frame them and put them on my walls.
Good for the mind.
Yeah.
It is. Yes, that's great.
Adam, this has been a very it's gonna take some time to unpack these concepts. I really appreciate you bringing this information to us, because I think any of us that have lived for any length of time know that, if you let it, adversity can be one of our greatest teachers. But then to take it a step further and think of it in terms of, as we're aging, instead of focusing on what am I losing, help to just accept there are going to be losses, and in a similar vein, but what am I gaining? That's and in light of caregiving, because just the tempo of the pressure of the physical activity, I think a lot of times just eats up the relational aspect of what you're losing now that you're no longer just the daughter or the spouse. Now you're the caregiver as well. To be able to step back from that, when you can, which is just probably going to be little tidbits of time, but to take that time and really cherish it and develop it and nurture it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank y'all for being with us today. We're glad to have Teresa back with us too. So thanks for being here.
Thank you. That was excellent, Adam. We're
Thank you.
privileged to have you with us.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Likewise with the rest of the team. Well, we will see you all next month for difficult behaviors. And we hope Michelle will be joining us again. We're waiting to confirm that. So if not, you'll be hearing from one of the rest of us. So anyway, have a good rest of your week, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Be safe.
Same to you.
Bye, Angela.
Take care.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.